Today's webinar presentation about the right way to select digital asset management technology. My name is Scott Dill. I'm on the business development team here with Real Story Group, and our managing director and lead DAM analyst, Jared Gingras, will be joining us momentarily to walk us through the heart of the presentation. We're really excited today. We've got a number of folks from around the world. Actually, I see people logged in from Denmark, Italy, UK, France, of course, here in the US. We're on the east coast of the US. It's snowing pretty hard here outside, but we're going to keep it warm here on the inside as we walk through how to select DAM technology today. So a couple quick notes here as we get started. If you do have questions, you can ask those in the GoToWebinar control panel where it says questions on the drop down. We'll get to those at the end of the presentation. And for subscribers on the line, you'll be able to access a recording, while those that are joining us that are not subscribers, you can get access to these slides here over the next couple days when those are made available for from our marketing team. And if you are new to Real Story Group, I do want to take you through a couple quick high-level looks at our organization. First, we're an industry analyst firm, and what we do is provide detailed evaluations of vendors. So in the DAM space, for example, we analyze 33 solutions on their strengths, but maybe more importantly, on their weaknesses and where they could fall short for you. We also take on a number of consulting projects throughout the year where we'd actually come on site and act as an extension of your team to help you through a successful technology selection and ultimately making sure that you're picking the solution that's the right fit for what it is you're trying to do. And then as you move on, we also work with you to benchmark how effective you are with that technology and measuring yourselves against your industry peers. So just what's different about us is that we focus only on what we call a digital technology space, or some bigger buckets would be digital workplace and digital marketing technology. You'll see here, these are the 8 markets we cover, and you can subscribe to one of these marketplaces or all 8 or somewhere in between, whatever makes sense for your particular organization. One other thing I do want to mention about us is we're completely unique in the analyst world in that we don't do any work for the vendors that we evaluate. So we don't speak at their conferences or take dinners from them. So we give them any sort of preferential treatments in our research. Our only focus is helping you to make the right technology selection. And that's what we're going to talk about during today's presentation. So one other thing I do want to mention as well is that we do have a book available from Jared along with our company founder, Tony Byrne, and they help to collaborate on a book for the right way to select technology. And if you do want to order that online, you can just click on the link there and then use the 20% discount code that's listed. So we're going to, again, go through today's digital asset management and the right way to select that type of a solution here in 2018. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our lead analyst in that space, Jared Gingras.
Hey, thanks, Scott, and I'll echo what Scott said. Thank you all for taking some time out of your day to join us. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart as the lead DAM analyst and the author of this book, The Right Way to Select Technology. A lot of the lessons that we put into the book came about because of the work that we've done helping people select all sorts of technology, but in particular digital asset management technology. And so as we get started, one of the reasons that we did write that book, and one of the reasons that we produce the research that we do on an everyday basis and do the kind of consulting work that Scott mentioned, is because we find people making mistakes when it comes to picking technology. And I think that leads back to what we sometimes describe as the wrong way to select technology. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But one of the reasons people make mistakes is because as buyers, you have a ton of options at your disposal. This what I'm showing you on the screen is our somewhat infamous subway map or vendor map that we publish several times a year that really shows the world that we live in. Each of these subway lines, if you will, represent a vendor marketplace that we evaluate. As Scott mentioned, we're currently looking at following 8 different marketplaces. But if there is some logic in this map, is that there are some hubs on the lines here, and some of the biggest names in the software world are trying to be players in many of these 8 different content-based technology areas. But the good news to you all as potential buyers of technology is you have options. Whether you go for a suite of products from one of these big name vendors at the center here, or you go out into the outer regions of these subway lines and look at more of a best of breed type technology that is solely focused on the marketplace that you're considering. You have options, and as buyers, that's always a good thing. So today's webinar is certainly about the wrong and right way to select DAM technology. It's something that we do on a regular basis because so many of you are looking at purchasing new DAM technology, so it's something that we repeat on an ongoing basis. But I did want to just quickly call your attention to a webinar that we're doing in a few weeks for our subscribers only, and that is a real deep dive into digital asset management and some of the research that we've been publishing recently. And really a state of the marketplace in 2018, particularly with some notions around this digital asset management divide that we're witnessing in the marketplace. And it's kind of a critical divide, and it's something that if you're interested in DAM, that's certainly something that you should check out on March 1st. So with that said, let's get into, as I mentioned earlier, some of the traditional ways that we see people selecting DAM technology. And in other words, I'll call this the wrong way to select DAM technology. So the first method I'll talk about is something that we like to call blind love. And we see this happen all the time, particularly when people go to conferences or see vendor demos online. Maybe you sign up for a vendor demo. What happens is those vendor demos always look good. They always look nice and slick. They always highlight the latest and greatest features and functionalities of these vendors. And for those of you struggling with managing your assets, that can be very attractive. And it's almost like you see these demos and you say, oh, that's definitely better than what we have. Let's just go with this particular vendor. And that can be a real challenge if you don't extend your research beyond just a few demos or just the vendors you see at different conferences. The next traditional method is something that we call happiness is a warm set of binders. If any of you have been through a selection process before, the traditional way to start these types of engagements is to go out and survey your entire organization and put together a laundry list of requirements, usually throw that into an Excel spreadsheet, cut and paste those requirements into an RFP and throw it to a bunch of different vendors. And what do you get back? Well, something that looks like this. You get tons of responses that, quite frankly, usually the lowest level person at the vendor's office cut and pasted from the last time they responded to an RFP and tried to make some sense of a response to what you're asking for. And what we found is there's some value in this process, certainly, but we have, I think more often than not, what we've heard from both clients or customers or potential buyers and the vendors themselves is that this RFP processes that are based in laundry list of requirements are just a waste of time for everyone. They don't really give you the true picture of what you're trying to do, and vendors are just guessing as to how their solution is a good fit for what you're trying to do. So the next wrong way is something that we call the My Cousin Vinny approach. And here's something that we see happen quite a bit. Maybe you're at a conference and you meet some industry colleagues, or you're at a dinner party and you meet some folks who are also marketers or whatnot, and you tell them about your challenges that you're having managing your assets. And some also, and what we see happen time and time again are people say, well, we had that similar problem. You should try this vendor that we tried. And what we found, though, is that there's truly not a one-size-fits-all solution when out there. You really need to find a solution that's very custom or very much built for your particular use cases, your particular needs. And just because it worked for a colleague or a friend, it doesn't mean it's going to work for your enterprise. Next is something that we call the family car approach. And this is a situation where you might go to your IT department and say, hey, we need a DAM system. And we hear all the time people say, well, we already have Box or Dropbox or SharePoint. Why don't you just try those systems? And this is a little bit like, when I first got my driver's license and I wanted to go out and get a new car to drive, what I ended up driving was my family's minivan because that's what we had. And I think many organizations try to force fit their needs into software that they already have that is somewhat akin to what they're looking for, but not really the best fit. Next is the horse race approach. And if any of you have ever been to a horse race like me, you know that the first thing that happens when you walk into the racetrack is you go to the window, and before you get to the window, you're handed a racing form that has just a little bit of information about the horses that are competing today. And based on that just a little bit of information, you put your hard-earned money down on a particular horse. And we think this is really akin to those of you out there who put together your short list just based on some industry reports that show a graphic with let's maybe call it a quadrant, when you just look at the vendors that appear in the upper right of that quadrant and say that should be our short list. These must be the best vendors out there. And I can tell you that in almost every case, that's not a good way of doing this. You really need to do your research and find the vendors that are very much built for your needs. You can't just go out and look at a single snapshot view of a marketplace. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach here. And lastly is something that we call the implementer first methodology. And this is when many of you are working with implementers that you've been working with for a period of time, and you go to those implementers and say, hey, we know we need a new DAM system. Can you recommend a DAM system? Having worked on that side of the street, it's not that these implementers are trying to sabotage your environment, but even the most well-intentioned vendor-independent implementers can really only truly know a handful of products out there. Because to know products at a level to do an implementation, you have to know them really well, and it takes time to get to know those products. So just looking at a handful of vendors that a particular implementer has experience with is going to limit your purview of the marketplace, and you may be missing out on a technology that's really a good fit. So I like to say it's a little bit like going to Jeep guys to recommend which kind of car is right for you. In many cases, that's too limiting of a set to be focusing your attention on. So ultimately, with any of these wrong way approaches, we think there's too much guessing involved. There's too much risk that is involved. And what we aim to do in the course of the last 20 years that we've been around, we've been trying to codify a different way to select technology. And many of these methodologies are in that book that Scott mentioned, but it's based on the work that we do every day with our subscribers and our consulting clients. And when we set out to codify this, it really broke down into 6 different phases across 20 different steps. And I'm not going to take you through all of these today, but the most successful organizations we noticed were repeating many of these steps, many of these 20 steps. Now, you don't have to do all of them, but when we really took it to the next level and started boiling it down and really looked at, again, the most successful selections that we had been a part of or witnessed, we kept coming back to these common ideologies or principles that kept emerging. And what we found is that it really more and more aligned itself to a common way of approaching design that many people have been talking about. That's really in vogue today, and this term of design thinking. Stanford's design school has definitely done a ton of work on this over the last 30 years, but design thinking has really become a in vogue way of applying different principles to different designing of user experiences, whether public or internal. And what we found is if you start applying these principles to a tech selection, your chances of succeeding went up in a real tremendous amount. So with any tech selection, it's really a winnowing down process, right? You get to the right shortlist and you find a way to test it every step of the way until you're certain as to who you're going to move ahead with. And we took those design thinking principles and applied them to each of the phases that we recommend. So I'm going to quickly take you through each of these 5 different phases where we talk about empathy, defining, ideating, prototyping, and testing. But when we talk about winnowing things down, really we're talking about looking at all those options that you have at your disposal, making sure that you're looking at the right marketplace, making sure that you have the right shortlist, making sure that you put the right tests in place to really put your shortlisted vendors through their paces, and then you put them through their paces in the form of a demo, in the form of an actual proof of concept, and ultimately a competitive proof of concept where you're really sussing out everything that you need, all the questions that you need answered, so that you can make a proper decision and a confident decision without guessing. So let's start at the beginning and talk about the empathy phase. So from our perspective, when it comes to selecting technology, like I mentioned earlier, one of the worst things you can do is just try to document every single requirement as the first step of selecting technology. Now, there's time for that. There's time to go out and solicit requirements across your organization. But I think that the time for that is really during the implementation phase. When it comes to selecting technology, don't dive into the nth degree of detail. Rather, start and hone in on what we like to call the differentiating requirements. What are the requirements that really would lead you to choosing one vendor over another? Hone in on those requirements and describe your situation in a set of narrative scenarios that really paint a picture of what it is you're trying to do. So don't get into those individual features, but paint a picture of what it is you want your future working environments when it comes to managing your assets to be like. And we always say it's a bit of a art and science to this, where you want to be descriptive without being overly prescriptive as to exactly how you want the vendors to do it. But you want to leave it a little bit open-ended so the vendors can say, I understand what you're trying to do. Here's how my solution can best meet those needs. So again, don't make long laundry lists of requirements, checklists the bulk of your RFPs. Write those scenarios and make those scenarios the bulk of your RFPs. I can tell you from our feedback from vendors, they much rather get a scenario-based RFP because it really helps them understand if they're a good fit for what it is you're trying to do as well. So here's an example of a DAM scenario that we wrote for one client. And again, I can't stress enough that you really want to make these as real as possible, but again, describe, not prescribe. So in this example, we have some personas or some actors that are realistic. We try to describe some environments that are realistic to our organization. We try to describe the content and maybe some of the unique content that we have to deal with, and then talk about the processes that you go to actually manage your assets. All right, let's move to the next phase, which is the definition. Now here, we want to make sure, the critical piece here is that we want to make sure that of all those options that you have at your fingertips, we want to make sure you get to the right shortlist so that you can do your due diligence on those vendors. So how do you do that? Now, again, I'm going to pick on my analyst brethren, but looking at that single snapshot quadrant of the marketplace is not going to do you a service. In fact, it may do you a disservice, because I've seen time and time again vendors who appear on the lower left or in these other three pieces of the quadrant here contain vendors that were actually the best fit for our clients, and they would have been missed if they didn't look at all the options that they're in the marketplace. So here's a slide that shows some of the more significant vendors in the DAM marketplace today. In 2018, we just published some new research on a bunch of these vendors that's out there for subscribers. You can get that as always. But how do you make sense of these vendors? We describe these on a sort of spectrum of complexity from left to right, but your needs are certainly varied, and the DAM world has certainly come to encompass a wide variety of different options and that were built to solve some very specific needs. And what we always recommend as the first decision point in coming up with the right shortlist is to align your unique needs with the vendors that were fundamentally built to achieve those, to solve those needs. So the way we do that is we say, what are you trying to do? What scenarios are you trying to fulfill? So we have a number of scenarios here that we use in our DAM research. So for example, are you trying to do basic brand management? Are you trying to do to build a DAM library or photo archive? That's very different from a more publishing-oriented scenario like multi-channel publishing or periodical and catalog production management, or more video and time-based media management. So once you use those as your first discriminating decision factor, we work with our clients in this example in the context of our real quadrant shortlist generator, where we ask you to rate how important these are to you. We also ask you to look at your industry and try to align yourself with different vendors who have different vertical expertise. And then what we recommend is you get a real quadrant that's custom to you. Now, for those of you on the line, don't worry about this quadrant, because you do have no idea what criteria I put in to generate this one. But the point of it is, in coming up with a real quadrant or a real shortlist for your needs, is that every single one of you is probably going to have a quadrant that looks different. And I encourage any of you to if you're interested, go on to therealstorygroup.com. You can try this out for yourself. You might not get the whole result set unless you're a subscriber, but the point here is that there are some very specific criteria and weightings that go into this to giving you the right quadrant and right shortlist for your needs. Okay, so let's assume that you have the right shortlist. What do you do next? Well, the next is to start the testing process. You want to really put these vendors through their paces to really test them as to how good of a fit they are for you and your teams. So the first way you do that is to conduct realistic vendor demos where the vendors show how their solutions meet actually your needs. So the way we do that is we don't allow vendors to come in and give those same canned demos they give everyone else. What you really need to do here is construct a demo week where you tell the vendors you want them to come in and demonstrate your unique scenarios. So those scenarios that were the bulk of your RFP now become the focus of your demo week. And what this allows you to do is to get to see some demos that are really relevant to your users because they're real. And you try to make these things as real as possible. But what it also does is allows you to really structure this demo week so that you're able to compare apples to apples to apples, and you're not just seeing random features and functionalities that may or may not be applicable to your needs. Some key points here is to certainly make sure your team is represented. Again, your scenarios, make sure they demo the same scenarios, and this is your chance to start to ask some questions about pricing. Don't divorce the pricing from other things you see from the vendors. Start to have conversations around what's included, what's not included at the earliest possible phase here. Once you go through that demo week, ideally you are able to down select your options to 2 finalists. What we recommend at the next phase is what we call our prototype phase, and what we want you to do here is to create a competitive proof of concepts. Sometimes this is actually known as a bake-off, where you're now taking your final vendors, your final two vendors, and saying, okay, we want you both to lead us through an exercise that mimics a DAM implementation as much as possible. So the key here, again, is to keep those scenarios real. This is your chance to also inject some real content into it, especially some tricky content that you might be trying to manage. It's your first chance to get your staff to actually get their hands on this technology, and it's your first chance to have your staff actually work with the people that would be doing the implementation. So you certainly want to learn a lot about the technology, but you also want to learn a lot about the teams and the people behind that technology. And then this is also your chance to actually prove out some real important pieces in terms of how well does this DAM system integrate with some legacy systems. So maybe you're hooking it into a PIM system or a PLM system or a marketing automation system or a web content management system, and understanding how those integrations will work. This is a good chance to suss out some of those open questions so that you're not surprised during an actual implementation. So again, make it as real as possible. Your cooks, your ingredients, your kitchen. And some of the pushback here that we hear all the time is that this is really resource intensive, but you're right, and it can be. But what's the cost of a failed implementation? So the more you can test, and the more you can make these test cases as real as possible, the better off you'll be, and the less surprises you'll get when you actually start an implementation. It's better to learn those lessons earlier before you sign the contract. So what we're talking about here, again, is a process that allows you to test at every step of the game. And, by sketching some light requirements up front, not getting into the nth degree of detail, you're able to refine over time. And as you go through this process, you might understand that certain of your requirements are actually more commoditized requirements because vendors have solved many of those problems and have solutions that are really good for what you're trying to do. But you might evolve over time to realize that other requirements are a little bit trickier for these vendors to satisfy, and so you may spend more time testing those types of things. So a lot of lessons get learned along the way, and an approach like this allows you that agility to adapt as you go along. So again, it's really important as you go through any technology vendor selection to be thinking about how good of a fit is this technology for my scenarios, how good is it from an actual technology fit, how good is it from a value fit, and how good is it from a partner fit. And I'll leave you with this difference between the traditional process and the more of the design thinking inspired process that I'm recommending to you today, is that spend a little bit less time on those requirements up front and spend more time writing those use case scenarios and spend more time testing so that you're able to learn more lessons and garner more value up front earlier. So again, you're not surprised only after you make a very expensive decision. All right, so that was a quick tour through this selection process, and I thank you all for sticking on with me today. If anyone has any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, I want to remind those of you who are subscribers or those of you who want to be subscribers, all of our DAM research is being updated just like we do all of our vendor evaluations on an ongoing basis, but we have recently released a bunch of new evaluations in the DAM space because there's been some really exciting updates in the DAM vendor marketplace. I'll be talking a lot more in much more detail about some of those updates in this March 1st webinar on navigating the 2018 DAM divide. I think it's a really important conversation that we need to have, and now is the right time to have it. So I hope to see some of you then. Again, if anyone has any questions or would like to see anything, any of the research that we talked about, I encourage you to download a free sample or try out that Real Quadrant tool or any of the other tools that we have on the realstorygroup.com site, or feel free to contact me directly with any questions. I'd be happy to answer as many as I can. Thank you all for joining me. I know we're about out of time. There are not too many questions. There are a couple questions around how to subscribe and are there different subscription models and whatnot. And I'd certainly encourage you to go to the Buy Now page on the realstorygroup.com site. We publish all of our pricing. We're very transparent about that because, quite frankly, we beat up on a lot of technology vendors for not being as transparent with their pricing. So we made a decision long ago to put our pricing right out there. So if you want to check that out, please feel free to do that. And then there's one more question around some trends that we're seeing. We did a webinar recently about some other trends that we're seeing, and we will certainly be digging into a lot more of those details on the trends in that other webinar that I mentioned on March 1st. So without further ado, I think we'll wrap up, but thank you all for spending some time with me today, and I hope to connect with you all down the line. Thank you.